There's a strange contradiction about money that most people never notice. The richest people often don't look rich, and the people who look rich often aren't. We've been trained to believe wealth has a very specific appearance: a luxury car pulling into a restaurant, a watch that costs more than a year's rent, a house that announces success before you even walk inside. From childhood, society teaches us to recognize wealth through signals: expensive vacations posted online, designer clothes, perfect kitchens, a life that appears effortless from the outside. But here's the uncomfortable truth: most of those signals are performances. Real wealth operates very differently. It grows quietly, slowly, often invisibly. And the strange part is that while it's forming, it rarely feels impressive. In fact, it often feels like the opposite. While others appear to be accelerating ahead, you might feel like you're standing still. Your life might even look boring. No dramatic upgrades, no flashy purchases, no sudden transformation that signals to the world that something has changed, which leads many people to a dangerous conclusion. They assume nothing is working. They believe they're falling behind. They think they're stuck in the middle while everyone else is moving forward. But the psychology of wealth tells a very different story, because the early stages of becoming rich rarely look like progress. They look like restraint. They look like patience. And they look like ordinary decisions repeated quietly over time. And that creates a strange emotional experience. You might be building something powerful without any visible confirmation that it's happening. No applause, no validation, no obvious proof. Just slow movement beneath the surface. The strange part about becoming rich is that most people don't realize it while it's happening. They expect wealth to arrive like a sudden event, a breakthrough, a big win, a moment when everything changes at once. But real financial transformation is rarely dramatic. It's psychological before it's financial. Long before bank accounts change, behavior changes. Thinking changes. Priorities shift in subtle ways most people never notice. These shifts are small, but they are powerful. They quietly move someone from a life of consumption into a life of ownership. And if you start noticing these changes in yourself, something important may already be underway. There are subtle behavioral and psychological signs that appear long before visible wealth. They don't show up on social media, they don't impress strangers, and most people overlook them entirely. But they are often the earliest indicators that someone is slowly, quietly becoming financially powerful. In this video, we're going to walk through 10 of those signs. 10 shifts in behavior and mindset that tend to appear when someone is unknowingly moving toward real wealth. So if several of these signs feel familiar, there's a good chance something important is happening in your life. You're not stuck. You're not falling behind. You may simply be in the quiet stage of wealth, the stage where the foundation is being built while no one is paying attention. And the first sign is something most people completely misunderstand. In fact, when it first appears, it usually feels like failure. And the first sign is something most people completely misunderstand. It's the moment your life starts looking boring. Not miserable, not stagnant, just strangely uneventful compared to everyone around you. There are fewer impulse purchases, fewer dramatic upgrades. The constant cycle of buying things just to feel progress slowly fades away. Your weekends become simpler. Your spending becomes quieter. Instead of chasing excitement, you start repeating the same steady habits over and over again. To an outsider, it can look like you've lost momentum. Friends might assume you're being overly cautious. Social media makes it look like everyone else is upgrading their lives while yours stays the same. But this is sign number 1. Your life begins to look financially boring. And that's not a problem. It's actually one of the safest environments wealth can grow in. Because wealth rarely grows in exciting environments. Exciting financial lives are usually chaotic ones. Constant spending, constant upgrades, constant emotional decisions. And real wealth grows in stability. It grows when spending becomes predictable. When your lifestyle stops expanding every time your income increases. When financial decisions stop being emotional and start becoming routine. And boring routines compound. The same way investments compound. The same way habits compound. What feels ordinary today quietly builds power over time. But while this change is happening, another psychological shift begins to appear at the same time. And this is sign number 2. You start caring less about impressing people. At first, it's subtle. You stop caring about the logo on a shirt, the brand of a watch, the car that signals success before you even step out of it. You begin to notice how many purchases around you are actually signals. Signals meant to communicate success, status, importance. But something inside you changes. Instead of asking, will people be impressed by this? You start asking a much quieter question. Do I actually need this? That question alone quietly dismantles one of the most expensive psychological traps in modern life: social spending. Because a huge portion of what people buy isn't about enjoyment, it's about validation. But the moment someone stops chasing validation through purchases, their financial life becomes dramatically lighter. Less pressure, less comparison, less unnecessary spending. And suddenly, more of their money begins staying exactly where it belongs, with them. When these two signs appear together, when your life becomes financially boring and the need to impress people fades, you've quietly stepped out of the status race most people spend their entire lives running. But once that happens, something even more powerful begins to change. Your relationship with money itself starts to slow down. Spending becomes more deliberate, decisions take longer, and small financial choices begin carrying more weight. And that brings us to the next sign that someone is quietly becoming rich. Once your life becomes financially quieter and the need to impress people begins fading, another shift quietly appears. It's subtle at first. You start noticing that your money stays longer. Not because you suddenly doubled your income, not because a huge financial breakthrough happened overnight, but because something small has changed in the way you interact with money. And this is sign number 3. Your money starts lasting longer than it used to. There was a time when money seemed to move quickly. You'd get paid, and before you fully realized it, large portions of it were already gone. Bills, upgrades, subscriptions, small purchases that felt harmless in the moment, but quietly drained your balance over time. But now something different is happening. Weeks pass, and your account looks surprisingly stable. You notice that you're not replacing things as often. You're not upgrading out of boredom. You're not solving every inconvenience with a purchase. The financial leaks begin to close. And what's interesting is that it rarely feels like extreme discipline. It just feels calmer. This is the moment when lifestyle inflation starts slowing down. For many people, every increase in income immediately triggers an increase in lifestyle. A better apartment, a nicer car, more expensive habits. But when someone is quietly becoming wealthy, that pattern begins to break. Income might increase, but lifestyle stays relatively stable. And the difference between those two numbers, the space between what you earn and what you spend, starts expanding. That space is where wealth quietly forms. But something even more powerful begins happening alongside this. Your financial decisions start slowing down. This is sign number 4. The time between impulse and action begins to increase. There was a time when buying something happened almost instantly. As you saw something you liked, you felt the emotional pull, and within minutes, or sometimes seconds, the purchase was made. But now there's a pause. You see something interesting, and instead of acting immediately, you wait. Maybe you tell yourself, I'll think about it for a day. Sometimes a day turns into a week. And strangely, many of the things that once felt urgent begin losing their appeal entirely. This pause is incredibly powerful, because wealth builders develop something most consumers never do: friction. They place small psychological barriers between desire and action, not because they're overly restrictive, but because they understand something most people never realize. Impulse is expensive. Emotionally driven spending is one of the fastest ways money disappears. But the moment someone inserts time between desire and decision, something remarkable happens. The emotional intensity fades, and logic takes its place. The purchase that once felt necessary suddenly feels optional, and many times it disappears completely. This simple habit, slowing down financial decisions, quietly protects enormous amounts of money over a lifetime. But once this friction becomes part of your behavior, another shift begins forming beneath the surface. Your priorities start changing. Status becomes less important than something far more powerful: control. And that leads directly to the next signs that someone is quietly becoming rich. Once your spending slows down and money begins staying longer, something deeper starts to change. Your definition of success begins shifting, not in a dramatic way, not overnight, but slowly, quietly, almost without you noticing. The things that once looked impressive start losing their power. And this brings us to sign number 5. Flexibility becomes more important to you than luxury. Earlier in life, success often looks like visible upgrades: a bigger house, a nicer car, expensive restaurants. The kinds of things that signal progress to the outside world. But at a certain point, something strange happens. You begin to realize that many of those upgrades come with hidden costs. The bigger house means bigger bills. The luxury car means bigger payments. The impressive lifestyle often means greater financial pressure. And suddenly the trade starts looking less attractive, because what those things quietly take away is flexibility, the ability to make choices freely. So the ability to walk away from situations that no longer serve you, the ability to move, pivot, or pause without financial panic. So your priorities begin shifting. Instead of asking, what looks successful? You start asking a very different question. What gives me the most control over my life? That shift marks the beginning of real wealth psychology, because status-driven spending often locks people into lifestyles they must constantly maintain. But control-driven decisions create space. Why? Space in your finances, space in your time, space in your future. And that leads directly to sign number 6. Your relationship with work begins to change. You start thinking about work differently. Earlier, work may have been about maximizing income at any cost: longer hours, more stress, more sacrifice in exchange for financial progress. But once someone starts building real financial stability, another goal quietly emerges: time freedom. Not the fantasy version often sold online, but something far more practical. The ability to say no. The ability to choose work that aligns with your life rather than consuming it entirely. The ability to prioritize health, relationships, and personal growth without feeling financially trapped. At this stage, money stops being purely about accumulation. It becomes about optionality. Options to change direction, options to slow down, options to design a life that actually fits you. And this is where the psychology of wealth becomes very different from the psychology of consumption. Consumption focuses on looking successful. Wealth focuses on being free. The more someone experiences this shift, the less impressive status symbols appear. Because once you experience control over your time and decisions, it becomes one of the most valuable assets imaginable. But as these priorities evolve, something else begins changing quietly in the background. The people around you start shifting too. Conversations change, influences change, the environment around you slowly transforms. And that leads us to the next signs that someone is quietly becoming rich. Once your priorities shift from status to control, another quiet transformation begins to unfold. It doesn't happen all at once. In fact, you might not notice it immediately. But slowly, the environment around you starts to change. The conversations feel different. The people you spend time with begin shifting. Certain interactions that once felt normal suddenly feel draining. And this is sign number 7. Your social circle begins to evolve. Earlier in life, many relationships revolve around shared habits: going out, spending, competing, or comparing progress. Who bought the newest car? Who upgraded their apartment? Who appears to be moving ahead faster? But as your mindset changes, those conversations start feeling strangely empty. Not because you judge them, but because they no longer excite you. Instead, you begin gravitating toward different types of discussions. Conversations about ideas, conversations about long-term goals, conversations about building something meaningful. You become more interested in people who talk about growth instead of appearances, people who discuss investing instead of spending, people who think about the future instead of constantly displaying the present. And over time, you naturally start spending more time in those environments. Not because you deliberately cut people off, but because alignment quietly pulls you in new directions. The truth is, wealth-building behaviors tend to cluster together. People who think long-term often surround themselves with others who think long-term. And when that happens, something subtle but powerful begins taking place. Your financial decisions start feeling normal instead of restrictive. Saving doesn't feel strange. Investing doesn't feel extreme. Patience doesn't feel lonely, because the environment around you now supports those choices. But alongside this shift in your social circle, something else begins fading quietly in the background. And this is sign number 8. Your urge to compare yourself to others begins weakening. Comparison used to feel automatic. You'd notice someone's car, their house, their vacation photos, and a small voice in your mind would start measuring your progress against theirs. Am I ahead? Am I behind? Am I doing enough? This constant comparison fuels much of the spending behavior in modern society. Because when people feel behind, they often try to close the gap through visible upgrades. But once someone starts focusing on building real wealth, that comparison loop slowly begins to break. Not because other people stop succeeding, but because you stop using their lives as a scoreboard. You realize something most people never fully understand. Everyone is playing a different financial game. Different starting points, different goals, different timelines. And once you see that clearly, the need to compete begins fading. You stop trying to win someone else's race. Instead, your attention turns inward, toward your own systems, your own progress, your own long-term strategy. This quiet detachment from status games is one of the most powerful psychological advantages a wealth builder can develop. Because the moment you stop competing financially with everyone around you, your money finally gets to work for you instead of your image. But as comparison fades and patience grows, another powerful shift begins appearing. Something that signals a completely different phase of financial life. For the first time, your money itself begins doing the heavy lifting. And that leads to the next signs that someone is quietly becoming rich. Once comparison fades and your focus shifts inward, something remarkable begins to happen. For the first time, progress starts appearing in places you're not directly controlling. Not because you worked longer hours, not because you pushed harder, but because something you built earlier has begun moving on its own. And this brings us to sign number 9. Your money begins working for you. At first, it's almost invisible. A small investment account slowly growing, dividends quietly appearing, assets increasing in value while you're focused on other parts of life. Nothing dramatic. In fact, if you look at it day to day, it may seem insignificant. But when you zoom out, something powerful is happening. Your effort is no longer the only engine producing financial progress. Earlier in life, money moved only when you moved. You worked, you earned. You stopped working, income stopped too. Your time and your income were directly connected. But once investments begin compounding, that relationship starts to loosen. Money begins producing more money. Even while you sleep, even while you travel, even while you focus on things completely unrelated to work. And the strange thing about this stage is that it often feels underwhelming at first. People imagine passive income arriving like a flood, but in reality, it usually starts as a quiet trickle. Small gains, small returns, small reinvestments happening quietly in the background. Yet, over time, that quiet system begins building momentum, because compounding doesn't grow in straight lines. It grows slowly, then suddenly. And the moment you realize that your financial life is no longer powered only by effort, a completely new feeling begins to emerge, which leads directly to sign number 10. Your anxiety around money starts dropping. Earlier in life, money often carried a constant tension, a feeling that everything depended on your next paycheck. Unexpected expenses felt stressful, and career uncertainty felt dangerous. Financial security always seemed one mistake away from disappearing. But once assets begin quietly supporting your financial life, that tension begins to soften. Not because you've reached some magical number, but because the system is no longer fragile. You're no longer relying on a single source of stability. Your income has layers, your financial life has buffers, and those buffers create something incredibly valuable: calm. No, a quiet confidence that your life isn't balanced on a knife's edge anymore. You stop checking your bank account with the same nervous urgency. You stop feeling the same pressure to chase every opportunity out of fear, because the foundation beneath your life has strengthened. And this is one of the clearest signals that someone is entering a completely different financial phase, the phase where money begins working harder than you do. But even at this stage, many people still don't recognize what's happening. They underestimate the quiet transformation that has taken place in their lives, which leads to the final realization most people only see when they look back. The moment when you finally understand that wealth didn't arrive suddenly. It was forming quietly all along. By the time someone reaches this stage, something strange has already happened. A transformation took place, but it didn't feel dramatic. And there was no single moment where everything suddenly changed. No clear day where you woke up and declared, "Now I'm wealthy." Instead, the shift happened quietly, one decision at a time, one habit at a time, one small choice repeated over years. And because of that, many people overlook the transformation entirely. They keep thinking they're still in the middle of the journey, still catching up, still waiting for the moment when real progress finally arrives. But when you step back and look carefully, the pattern becomes clear. Your life became calmer. Your spending became more intentional. Your priorities shifted away from status and toward control. Your money began staying longer. Your decisions slowed down. The need to impress people faded. Comparison stopped driving your choices. Your environment started filling with people who think long-term instead of short-term. And eventually, your money itself began doing some of the work. None of those changes felt dramatic while they were happening. But together, they formed something incredibly powerful: a system. And that's the real secret most people misunderstand about wealth. The people who eventually become financially free are rarely chasing signals of success. They aren't trying to look rich. They're building systems that quietly make them rich over time. Systems of spending, systems of saving, systems of investing, systems of thinking. And once those systems are in place, progress becomes almost inevitable. That's why wealth rarely feels exciting while it's forming. It feels slow. It feels patient. Sometimes it even feels invisible, because the foundation is being built beneath the surface where nobody can see it. But eventually, something strange happens. One day you look around and realize something you didn't fully notice before. The financial stress that once felt constant has softened. The pressure to prove yourself has disappeared. Your decisions feel calmer. Your life feels more stable. And the ordinary habits you once repeated without much attention have quietly built something extraordinary: freedom. Not the loud, flashy version often advertised online, but the quiet kind. The ability to make choices without fear. The ability to step away from things that don't align with your life. The ability to design your future instead of reacting to it. Now one day you look around and realize something strange. The life that once felt ordinary quietly turned into freedom. And if several of the signs in this video felt familiar, there's a good chance something important is already happening in your life. You're walking a path most people never reach, because most people spend their lives chasing signals of wealth instead of building the systems that create it. So, if this video helped you see your financial journey more clearly, take a moment to support the channel. Like the video so more people can discover it. Subscribe if you want to keep learning about the psychology behind money, wealth, and financial freedom. And most importantly, remember this: the quiet path often feels the slowest, but it's also the one that leads the furthest.